This story is titled, My Autistic Stepsister. Accused me of SA, and no one believes me because of her condition. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps our channel. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey guys, first time poster here. I honestly don't even know how to start this. I guess it's just one of those things where you think you know your family, you think you know how things work, and then something happens, and you realize maybe you didn't. For some context, I'm a 27-year-old guy. I've been living at home with my dad, my stepmom Sarah, and my stepsister Rachel, who's 20 and autistic. My mom and dad split up when I was about 10, and Sarah came into the picture a few years later. She's been in my life for a long time, and while we've had our differences, I never thought it would come to this. Rachel's a sweet kid. I say kid because even though she's 20, she feels younger in a lot of ways. She's super into her routines and has these specific things she's obsessed with, like crime dramas and board games. She'll watch these shows on repeat and quote lines from them randomly, sometimes when it doesn't even make sense. She's really bright but struggles with understanding stuff like sarcasm or things that aren't literal. It's just how her mind works, you know? So, a few weeks ago, Sarah asked me to watch Rachel for a night while she and my dad went out to dinner. This wasn't a big deal. I've watched Rachel a bunch of times before. We hung out, played the game of life, which she always insists on winning, and then we watched her favorite detective show. I even made her dinner, mac and cheese with hot dogs, her absolute favorite. Everything seemed totally normal. She went to bed happy, and I didn't think twice about it. The next morning, though, everything changed. I was in my room scrolling through my phone when Sarah barged in. And I mean barged. She didn't knock or anything, just came in yelling, "What did you do to Rachel?" I sat up, completely confused. I had no idea what she was talking about. When I asked her to explain, she said Rachel had told her I'd touched her. My stomach dropped. I couldn't even process what she was saying at first. Touched her? What are you talking about? I asked. I tried to stay calm, but my voice was shaking. Sarah just kept going, saying Rachel would never lie about something like this, and that I needed to confess. Confess to what, though? Nothing happened. We played a game, watched TV, and then she went to bed. That was it. But Sarah wasn't listening. She stormed out, yelling that the family needed to deal with this. The next thing I knew, Sarah had called a family meeting. My dad, Sarah, me, and even a couple of my cousins and uncles were crammed into the living room. The tension was thick, like you could feel it in the air. Sarah sat there with her arms crossed, glaring at me like I was some kind of monster. My dad looked confused but supportive. He kept saying, "Let's hear him out." But Sarah wasn't having it. "Rachel told me everything," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "She said he touched her, and he's just sitting there pretending like nothing happened." I tried to explain, but every time I opened my mouth, Sarah would cut me off. "Why would Rachel lie about this?" she kept saying. "She doesn't even know how to lie." I looked at my dad, desperate for him to back me up, and he did, but it didn't make much of a difference. "I know my son," he said. "He's not capable of something like this." But Sarah was adamant. She said Rachel was upset and confused when she came to her that morning, and that she'd never seen her like that before. I tried to tell them that Rachel gets confused easily, that maybe she misunderstood something, but it was like talking to a brick wall. By the end of the meeting, Sarah had made up her mind. She told everyone I wasn't allowed to be around Rachel anymore, and if I didn't like it, I could leave. My dad looked helpless, and my cousins wouldn't even make eye contact with me. It felt like I was being exiled from my own family for something I didn't do. That night, I sat in my room, replaying everything in my head. Had I done something that Rachel misunderstood? Was there a moment where I'd accidentally scared her or made her uncomfortable? But no matter how much I thought about it, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. Nothing happened. I didn't do anything wrong. So why was this happening? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face, full of anger and accusation. I kept thinking about Rachel too. Did she really believe I'd hurt her? Or was this something Sarah had twisted into a bigger deal than it was? I didn't know what to do. The next day, my dad tried to talk to Sarah, but it didn't go well. She was furious that he wasn't taking this seriously. She told him she was going to the police. The days after Sarah's accusation were some of the most stressful of my life. I felt like a stranger in my own house, constantly on edge, wondering what Sarah might do next. It didn't take long to find out. She made good on her promise and went to the police. A few days later, I got a call asking me to come down to the station for questioning. I've never been the kind of person to get into trouble, not even minor stuff. The idea of going to the police station made me feel sick, but I didn't have a choice. When I arrived, I was led into a small, windowless room. It was just me, a detective, and my lawyer. The detective started asking questions, some straightforward, some that felt like accusations wrapped in curiosity. What's your relationship with Rachel like? Has Rachel ever seemed uncomfortable around you? Do you think Rachel could have misinterpreted something you did? I answered every question as honestly as I could, trying to stay calm even though my heart was pounding. I told them about how Rachel and I spent the evening together, playing the game of life, watching TV, and then her going to bed. Nothing about that night had been out of the ordinary. The detective seemed neutral, but that almost made it worse. He wasn't angry or accusatory, he was just doing his job. But even answering questions like, "Have you ever touched Rachel inappropriately?" felt like a stain on my character. The fact that I even had to defend myself against something so awful was almost too much to bear. After what felt like hours, the questioning was over. My lawyer told me I handled it well, but I didn't feel any better. The fact that I'd been sitting in that room at all made me feel dirty, like my name was already tarnished no matter what. When I got home, the tension in the house was unbearable. Sarah wouldn't even look at me. My dad tried to talk to her, but all I could hear through the walls was her yelling. "How can you just sit there and defend him after what Rachel said?" she screamed. My dad kept trying to reason with her, but it was clear she wasn't budging. Rachel, meanwhile, acted like nothing had happened. She came up to me later that night, smiling and asking if we could play a game. Her behavior completely threw me off. If she'd been so upset that she told Sarah I'd hurt her, why was she acting so normal? It didn't make sense. I started thinking about Rachel's love for crime shows and how she often quoted dramatic lines from them. There had been times before where she'd said things like, "He's guilty, I just know it," or "You can't trust anyone," while playing pretend. Could this be one of those moments? Could she have repeated something she saw on TV and Sarah took it seriously? I tried to bring this up to Sarah, but she shut me down before I could even finish a sentence. "You're not going to twist this around and make Rachel look like she doesn't know what she's talking about," she shouted. "She's not stupid." I didn't say she was stupid. I would never say that. But Sarah was too angry to listen. I wasn't trying to blame Rachel. I was just trying to figure out what could have caused this misunderstanding. But it didn't matter. Sarah had already decided I was guilty, and there was no convincing her otherwise. The worst part was the way the rest of the family started treating me. Sarah made sure everyone knew what she thought I'd done. And even though no one said it to my face, I could feel the shift. My cousins stopped answering my texts. My aunt and uncle, who usually called every week, went silent. I even noticed some neighbors avoiding me when I walked down the street. I was surprised how quickly everything had changed. Just a few days ago, I was part of a family. Now, I was the outcast. And the worst part? I had no idea how to fix it. Everything felt like I was fighting a losing battle. After the police questioning, I felt like my life was spiraling out of control. Every time I tried to defend myself, Sarah shut me down, and the rest of the family followed her lead. My dad was the only person who seemed to believe me, but even he looked worn down from the constant arguing. I spent a lot of time replaying that night in my head, trying to figure out what could have gone wrong. Rachel had seemed completely fine. She laughed during our board game, got excited over her favorite TV show, and happily went to bed. Nothing about her behavior suggested she was upset or scared. But then Sarah's accusation came out of nowhere, and my whole world fell apart. One night, as I sat in my room trying to piece everything together, I remembered something: the security camera. My dad had installed a small camera in the living room a few months ago to keep an eye on Rachel when no one else was home. It was positioned near the TV, overlooking most of the living room, including the couch and the game table. If the camera had been recording that night, it might hold the proof I needed to clear my name. The next morning, I approached my dad about it. "What about the security camera in the living room?" I asked. "Do you think it recorded anything that could help?" My dad's eyes widened slightly. "You might be onto something," he said. He agreed to check the footage while Sarah was out running errands. When we finally pulled up the recordings, I could hardly breathe. My dad and I watched as the footage played back every moment of that evening. There we were, sitting at the table playing the game of life. Rachel was smiling, laughing, and teasing me about losing. After the game, the camera caught us moving to the couch to watch her favorite detective show. The two of us sat there quietly, eating snacks while the TV played. Nothing about it seemed unusual. The final clip showed me walking Rachel to her room. She gave me a quick hug at the doorway before disappearing inside. I stood there for a moment, turned off the light, and walked back to the living room. That was it. There was nothing even remotely suspicious on the footage. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "This proves I didn't do anything," I said, looking at my dad. He nodded, his expression serious. It's solid evidence, he said. But you know Sarah's not going to take this well. My dad was right. When we showed Sarah the footage later that day, she barely even looked at the screen before dismissing it. This doesn't mean anything, she said, crossing her arms. Who knows what happened when the camera wasn't recording? That's ridiculous, my dad shot back. This footage shows the entire evening. There's no gap, no opportunity for anything to happen. You need to stop accusing him of something he clearly didn't do. But Sarah wouldn't back down. You're just taking his side because he's your son, she snapped. Rachel told me what happened, and I believe her. This video doesn't change that. Her refusal to even consider the evidence was infuriating. I wanted to scream at her, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. She'd already made up her mind, and nothing I said or showed her was going to change it. After that, my dad suggested taking the footage to the police. They'll have to consider this, he said. It's concrete proof. I agreed, and my lawyer helped us submit the footage as evidence. The process was slow, but I finally felt like I had something solid on my side. Even with the footage submitted, life at home remained unbearable. Sarah avoided me entirely, barely acknowledging my existence. Rachel, meanwhile, acted like everything was normal. She still asked me to play games with her and quoted lines from her TV shows like nothing had happened. It was surreal. I couldn't help but wonder what Sarah had said to Rachel to convince her something had happened. Had she pressured her into believing it, or was Rachel just repeating something she thought Sarah wanted to hear? Either way, it felt like Sarah was the one driving this whole thing, not Rachel. As the days dragged on, I clung to the hope that the footage would be enough to clear my name. It was undeniable proof of my innocence, but deep down, I knew that even if the police believed me, it wouldn't fix everything. The damage Sarah had done to my reputation and relationships couldn't be undone so easily. Once the security footage was submitted to the police, I thought things might finally calm down. But Sarah's refusal to acknowledge the evidence kept the tension in the house unbearable. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was short and dripping with contempt. My dad urged me to focus on the legal side and not let her get under my skin, but it was hard to ignore how much worse things had become. Rachel, as usual, seemed oblivious to the turmoil. I didn't know how to act around her anymore. Part of me wanted to keep things as normal as possible, but another part of me felt uneasy, knowing Sarah was watching my every move, waiting for another excuse to accuse me. With the tension reaching a breaking point, my dad suggested holding a family meeting to show everyone the footage. If Sarah won't accept it, maybe others will, he said. I wasn't optimistic, but I agreed. I needed to defend myself, and if there was even a small chance someone in the family would listen, I had to take it. The meeting was held at my dad's request. He invited Sarah, my dad, and a few close family members, my aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins. They arrived looking uncomfortable, clearly unsure of what to believe. Sarah was the last to show up, walking in with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. I could already tell she wasn't going to make this easy. I connected my laptop to the TV and started playing the footage. As the video showed Rachel and me playing the board game, I explained everything step by step. You can see here that she's laughing and happy, I said. There's no sign of anything being wrong. When the video moved to us watching TV, I pointed out how calm everything was. This is exactly how we spent the night. Nothing happened. Finally, I showed the clip of Rachel going to bed, cheerful and unbothered. This is the entire evening, start to finish, I said, turning to the group. There's no room for doubt. For a moment, the room was quiet. My aunt cleared her throat and said, "Well, it looks pretty normal to me." My cousins nodded slightly, and my uncle murmured something about how convincing the footage was. But then Sarah spoke up. "This proves nothing," she said, her voice sharp. "What if he did something when the camera wasn't looking? Or manipulated the footage? How do we know this is the whole story?" My dad stepped in. "Sarah, this is ridiculous. You've been accusing him without any evidence, and now you're ignoring solid proof that he didn't do anything." Sarah snapped back, "Of course you'd take his side. He's your son. You're just blinded by loyalty." The argument escalated from there, with my dad defending me and Sarah doubling down on her accusations. My dad stayed quiet through most of it, but at one point, he mumbled something about the footage seeming legitimate. Sarah shot him a look that immediately shut him up. I tried to stay calm, but it was hard not to lose my temper. "You've already decided I'm guilty," I said, looking directly at Sarah. "No matter what I say or show you, you're never going to believe me." She didn't deny it. Instead, she said, "I trust Rachel, and I don't need a video to tell me what's true." The meeting ended without resolution. My aunt and uncle said they'd think about what they saw, but it was clear they didn't want to take sides. My cousins looked uncomfortable and avoided making eye contact with me as they left. Sarah stormed out, dragging my dad with her, and I was left sitting on the couch feeling more defeated than ever. The only silver lining was my dad. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll keep fighting this. You've got the truth on your side." I appreciated his support, but it didn't change the fact that my family was fractured and my reputation was still in ruins. Even with the truth right in front of them, some people just didn't want to see it. The security footage was the lifeline I desperately needed. My lawyer submitted it to the police, and after weeks of waiting, I finally got the news. The case had been dropped. The footage proved there was no basis for Sarah's accusation, and the authorities had no reason to move forward. Legally, I was in the clear, but it didn't feel like a victory. When I told my family the case was dismissed, Sarah didn't react the way I'd hoped. She wasn't relieved or apologetic. Instead, she doubled down. "Of course they dropped it," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You're good at covering your tracks." Her words cut deeper than I thought they would. Even with all the evidence on my side, Sarah refused to let go of her version of events. Worse, she continued spreading her story to anyone who would listen. Every time I went out, I could feel the weight of people's judgment. Neighbors who used to say hello now avoided me. I tried to focus on the fact that I was no longer under investigation, but the stigma followed me everywhere. It didn't matter that the police had cleared me. The damage to my reputation was done. People didn't need proof to believe the worst. At home, things were worse than ever. Sarah avoided me entirely, and when we did cross paths, the air was so tense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. My dad tried to mediate, but it was clear he was exhausted. He told me more than once, "I don't know how much longer I can live like this." I felt guilty for putting him in the middle, but what choice did I have? Rachel continued to act like nothing had happened. She still asked me to play games or watch TV with her, but I couldn't bring myself to join her anymore. I didn't blame her for any of this. She probably didn't even understand the full extent of what was going on, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness I felt around her. What if she repeated something else? What if Sarah twisted it again? The rest of the family was divided. My aunt and uncle told me they believed me but didn't want to get involved. My cousins avoided me altogether. I couldn't blame them for keeping their distance. Sarah was relentless in her accusations, and siding with me meant risking her wrath. Even at work, things felt different. My boss was understanding and told me I didn't have to explain myself, but I could feel the tension with some of my coworkers. Conversations would stop when I walked into the room, and people I'd been close to started keeping me at arm's length. It was like the accusation had tainted every aspect of my life. I started seeing a therapist to help me process everything, but even that felt like a small comfort in the face of such overwhelming isolation. How do you rebuild your life when so many people have already made up their minds about you? The hardest part was realizing that even with the truth on my side, there would always be people who believed Sarah. Some of them probably thought I'd gotten away with something, while others just didn't want to deal with the mess. It felt like no matter what I did, I'd never escape the shadow of her accusation. For the first time in my life, I started to think about leaving. My hometown, my family, my job, everything I'd built here felt poisoned by what had happened. Staying meant living under constant suspicion, and I wasn't sure I could handle that. I knew it would be hard to start over somewhere new, but at least it would give me a chance to escape the stigma that had taken over my life. I hadn't made up my mind yet, but the idea was becoming harder to ignore. Maybe the only way to move forward was to leave it all behind. Final update. After weeks of trying to hold on, I finally made the decision to leave. Staying in my hometown had become unbearable. No matter how much evidence I had to prove my innocence, it felt like people still looked at me with suspicion. The whispers, the avoidance, and the judgmental glances were constant reminders of how far-reaching Sarah's accusations had become. The final straw came one afternoon when I stopped by a local coffee shop. I was waiting for my order when I overheard two women talking at a nearby table. "That's him," one of them whispered. "You know, the guy Sarah was talking about." The other one glanced over at me, and their conversation lowered into hushed tones. I felt terrible. I had to force myself to stay calm until I got my coffee and left. I couldn't keep living like this, walking around feeling like I had a scarlet letter on my chest. It didn't matter that the case was dismissed, or that I had security footage proving my innocence. People had made up their minds, and Sarah's refusal to let it go ensured that the rumor mill kept turning. That night, I told my dad I was leaving. He looked tired, sad, but not surprised. "I get it," he said quietly. "I hate that it's come to this, but you need to do what's best for you." Packing up my life was surreal. I didn't have much. Just a couple of suitcases and a handful of personal items. But the act of putting everything into bags felt heavier than it should have. Each item I packed reminded me of a life I was leaving behind, a life that had been ripped apart by an accusation I never saw coming. Before I left, I sat down with Rachel one last time. She had no idea I was going, and I didn't want to upset her, so I kept it simple. We played one final round of her favorite board game, and when she asked if we could watch a show after, I gently told her I couldn't. Maybe next time, I said, even though I knew there wouldn't be a next time anytime soon. As I said goodbye to Rachel, she hugged me tightly and said, "You're my favorite." It broke my heart. None of this was her fault. She didn't fully understand what had happened, or the consequences of Sarah's accusations. Leaving her felt like abandoning her, but staying wasn't an option anymore. I didn't bother saying goodbye to Sarah or my dad. I left a note explaining that I was moving to a different city to rebuild my life. It wasn't out of spite, it was just easier this way. There was no point in confronting them again. Sarah would never apologize or admit she was wrong, and my dad would never stand up to her. I moved to a small city a few hours away. It wasn't far enough that I couldn't visit my parents if I wanted to, but it was far enough that no one here knew who I was or what had happened. Starting over was harder than I expected. Finding a new job, making new friends, and adjusting to a new routine felt overwhelming at times, but it was also liberating. For the first time in months, I could walk into a store or a coffee shop without feeling like I was being judged. I started to focus on small victories, getting a new job, meeting new people, and finding hobbies that made me happy. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again. My dad called me often, checking in to see how I was doing. He told me things at home were still tense, especially between him and Sarah. "She hasn't let it go," he admitted one night. "But I don't think she ever will." I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. And while I felt bad for him, I also felt a sense of relief knowing I wasn't in the middle of it anymore. Over time, I started to rebuild my life. I joined a local sports league to meet new people, and even started volunteering at a shelter. It wasn't easy, but each step forward felt like a small victory. Cutting ties with Sarah and my stepsister was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it was also the right one. Some people will never accept the truth, no matter how much evidence you have. Staying in a place where I was constantly under suspicion would have destroyed me. Leaving gave me a chance to heal, to start fresh, and to focus on building a life where I wasn't defined by someone else's lies. I still think about Rachel sometimes. I wonder if she misses me or if she's moved on like nothing happened. I hope one day she'll understand why I had to leave. Until then, I can only focus on what's ahead and do my best to move forward. Starting over isn't easy, but sometimes it's the only choice you have.